Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our afternoon session this afternoon as part of our National Safety Month presentations that we've got for you this weekend. My name's Cody Calder. I'm the Head of Safety at RA Oz and very excited to welcome our next presentation this afternoon. Before we get started, I'd just like to take the opportunity to thank our National Safety Month sponsors. We have over $10,000 worth of giveaways to give away throughout the month of October, and we wouldn't be able to do it if it wasn't for our sponsors. Of course, thank you to Garmin, who is a gold sponsor of National Safety Month and the sponsor of today's presentations. And you can check out Garmin's range of products online, and they also have a presentation tomorrow afternoon that you can tune into as well. Just before we get started, if it's your first time joining us in the system, on the right-hand side of your screen, you should have a Q&A window. In that window, you can type in questions for our presenter today, if you have any that come to mind. If that chat window is not open, there should be a blue chat button in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. If you hit that chat button, then it should open that panel so that you can type your questions in there. So on that note, I will welcome in today's presenter, and we're very happy and excited to have AMSA joining us today. Good afternoon, and thanks for joining us.
Yeah, good afternoon, Cody. How are you today?
Yeah, good. Thanks. Yourself?
Yeah, good. Thank you. Good. So today we're going to be talking about beacons for your members.
Wonderful.
And we're trying to debunk some of the myths that might be out there and hopefully make everyone feel a bit more comfortable about having a beacon and how they're going to use it or why they should have one.
Yeah, that's right. I'm sure there's some great tips our members can take away from this presentation. So I'll leave you with it and handing over.
Excellent. Thank you. Okay, guys. So welcome to the brief today. As I just mentioned to Cody, we'll be talking about beacons. Hopefully sort of make them a little bit less scary for some of you who have had very little interaction with them previously. More importantly, I suppose I should introduce myself. So my name's Jim Ritchie. I'm one of the search and rescuers here for the Australian Maritime Safety Authority, and I've been doing that for the past 2 years. Prior to that, I've had a mixed aviation career spanning general aviation, Royal Australian Navy, military aviation, and the EMS world with the rescue helicopters. I'll just make apologies now. I haven't used this service before, so if I seem a bit clunky with the PowerPoint presentation, it's a brand new system for me, but we'll get through as best we can. Okay, as a bit of an introduction into search and rescue in Australia and leading into AMSA, I'll give you a bit of a history lesson. So Australian Search and Rescue, or what was previously known as AMSA, and some of you may have heard of that term before, was first brought into being in July 1997, and that was an integrated aviation maritime search and rescue coordination centre. Today that has changed names, and we are now the Joint Rescue Coordination Centre, to bring us in line with international naming protocols, or the JRCC. And we operate as a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week service here in Canberra. Okay, we handle over 8,000 incidents a year generally. That has actually been climbing up to the 10,000 incident mark on occasion. Normally staffed with six full-time officers during the day and 4 each night. Search and rescue officers like myself are recruited from the aviation and maritime industries, and most of us hold professional qualifications in those fields, whether that be pilot, marine vessel captain, deckhand, fisherman. For me, I was an air crewman officer. It depends on the basis. We do like to have that broad spectrum to give us a good awareness of what's happening around both sides of the industry. Generally, it would take about 6 months to train a search and rescue officer in the JRCC. From the time they've left their active industry work to hitting the floor is, that 6-month period. What we do, we declare phases, we gather intelligence, we source suitable search and rescue assets, we brief search and rescue crews, so whether that be our tier one assets like the Challenger aircraft AMSA has on contract, to the state rescue helicopters you'll see in each of your states. We liaise with police, defence, air traffic control, foreign affairs and trade, border force, any other agencies that can provide us information or has a situation that they need help with. We are the ones that develop the search and rescue strategies, and we will often come up with the search areas, and we will also determine the time for survival, whether that be to end a search or give us reason to continue on with the search. That's based on the time frame for survival, and our role, once that time frame for survival for search and rescue purposes, will end at the end of the survival time frame. We'll also brief the media on behalf of AMSA with regard to certain situations. The mission for AMSA in the JRCC is basically brought down to finding anybody as quickly as possible with the most appropriate rescue assets available and have them returned to a place of safety. So our intent is not just to find you and have someone come to you. Our sort of premise is to get the person in need back to a place of safety, whether that's the nearest Australian port, international port, airfield or hospital. That's when our remit completes. Okay, you can see here on the screen, this is a breakdown of the Australian SRR, so our search and rescue region, and that in itself is 10% of the world service. We have the largest SRR in Australia, and that area also corresponds very closely to our FIR, so the Flight Information Region, which Australia also controls. They are not the same, but they are very similar. Okay, looks like my system's locked up for a sec. Okay, back onto the brief. One of the assets we use, I've mentioned it before, our tier one asset, which is the AMSA contracted Challenger aircraft. We have 4 of those as part of a common contract. 3 of them operational on every day, one based in Cairns, one based in Essendon, and one based in Perth, and one spare, which is often kept in Cairns where they do the majority of their maintenance, and that will be relocated to wherever required at short notice. The other aircraft type I mentioned was the rescue helicopters. So whether that be TOL, if you're a New South Wales resident, you would have seen the TOL helicopters moving about. RACQ in Queensland, the Air Ambulance in Victoria, St John Ambulance and CHC in WA, or the MAC aircraft in South Australia. Each state has its own rescue helicopter service, and we'll use those guys to help us out whenever we can. The helicopters are the one that actually do the recovery of personnel, as well as often finding people in small, tight areas, whether that be heavily wooded or crevasses, anything like that. That's a bit of an introduction and brief history. So the reason for the discussion today is the distress beacons, and obviously the major component of our distress beacon system is the COSPAS SARSAT system. It's an amalgamation of satellite systems from the USA, Canada, France, and Russia. They've all put their skin in the game by putting satellites up into the air, and we are, as a member of the COSPAS SARSAT system, able to use that technology. You can see here a very rough interpretation of how the system works. So down the bottom there, we've got a ship, we've got a crashed aircraft or a person out on the walk. They activate one of 3 different types of personal beacon or an emergency beacon, and that signal is sent up to the satellites. The satellites detect it, and they will pass it to what we call a local user terminal that receives the satellite transmissions. In Australia, we have one in Albany, WA. There's a second one in Bundaberg, and New Zealand has a LUT as well. So we will get information from the New Zealand LUT as well, depending on where the satellites download. That information from the LUT will be transported to the MCC, or the Mission Control Centre, which is here in Canberra with us, and that will then be sent to us in the RCC, so the Rescue Coordination Centre. From the Rescue Coordination Centre, we will then send out whatever response is required, whether that be the Challenger, the rescue helicopter, could be the local police, depending on the situation. So that's a very quick overview of the system at work. If anybody has any questions as I'm going through, I'm more than happy for you to put them up. If I notice them, I'll try and answer them whilst in the talk, but we will go through question and answers at the end as well. Okay, distress beacons themselves. So AMSA register on average 55,000 new beacons a year. These figures are pre-2020, so pre-COVID. We will see what the trend is like post-COVID in the next 18 months, I would suggest. 67% of those 55,000 beacons are registered online via the AMSA Beacons webpage. Excuse me. And 30% of beacons are unregistered. So there's 112,000 beacons out there that are unregistered. So there's no information attached to it. It basically just becomes a noise-making machine that lets us know there's something wrong, but we have no information to the background of it. The Australian beacon population is now approximately 485,000 active beacons in Australia, whether that be registered or unregistered. EPIRBs being more a maritime-based unit, we have 744 EPIRBs that are currently registered for aviation use. So think of that as a multi-use system, which is not recommended. And PLBs, 10,750 of those have been registered for aviation use. A lot of those I would suspect would be in memberships like yourselves with RAOs and some light aircraft that have chosen to have PLBs rather than an ELT. Previously, we didn't have GPS encoded beacons. They are becoming more common now, and I would certainly suggest anyone who's buying a beacon or looking to replace a beacon they have, look at having a GPS beacon, an encoded beacon. You can see here, this could be a satellite picture of an area we would have a beacon active in, and without a GPS signal, that's as close to the area as we could get. We'd have to search that area, and you're looking at approximately a 3 nautical mile area there. If we have a beacon registered and encoded, that can come down to 120 meters area, where we can basically send somebody in directly to that location and pick them up without having to conduct a search of the area itself. So straight away, you can see the benefits of having that GPS encoded position. Okay, one of the things I did mention, there was the EPIRBs, 3 different types of beacons. What we might do, and I'll go back to the previous slide. Okay, so looking at that large area, with the beacons themselves, the beacon will transmit on a 406 megahertz frequency, and that's what goes up to the satellite, where the data burst every 55 seconds going up to the satellite for transmission. Also, within that period, we have a 1215 megahertz audible signal. And for those of you who have been around aviation previously, you'd remember that the old beacons used to be on 1215 and 243. The beacons now are only on 1215 megahertz, and that gives us the ability to home the signal via direction finding equipment in the aircraft or on the ground. So even though I said we've got this 3 nautical mile space to look for you, if the signal is being heard, the aircraft will be able to DF to it or direction find to it and come straight to the position as well. Okay. Obviously, the GPS, though, is still the choice that we prefer everyone to have. Okay, so the 3 different types we spoke about, we've got the EPIRB. So the EPIRB is generally maritime use. It's designed to float. It has a strobe light attached. It will activate if it's immersed in water. So it has a water activation switch as well as a manual switch, and it's designed to transmit for 48 hours as a minimum. Some of them will transmit for 70 hours plus, but its minimum transmit time is 48 hours. Often these will be attached to lifebuoy rings or on masts. So a person on board, if they see someone go overboard, they can grab it, pull it off its mounting. The action of pulling it off its mounting itself will generally activate it. Throw it into the water with the lifebuoy ring attached and mark the position, and hopefully that lifebuoy ring will go to the person in the water. The ELT, which is the aviation-based beacon, and this is on all aircraft of a commercial nature and most VH-registered aircraft, has a G-force impact switch, okay? It can be operated manually in the cockpit. There is also generally a manual switch on the unit itself, and these are designed to transmit for 24 hours. These are registered to the aircraft, so as you put this in, it has to be registered via the CASA maintenance page to the aircraft itself, as well as via the CASA database. Importantly about these is the fact that it's a G-force impact switch. So if there is a hard landing or a crash landing, the impact of that should activate your ELT. For those of you, I suspect, who have the PLBs, which should probably be the majority of the members of RAOS, these for land-based activities, obviously you can use them for aviation use, and they are a much cheaper option. I'll just see a couple of questions come in. I'll get to those. I'll just finish talking about the PLB itself. So the land-based activity aviation, a cheaper option, so I can see why it's more attractive for RAOS users. Manual activation, so you have to actually physically turn this on yourself. If you have a hard landing and you're incapacitated and nobody else in the aircraft, your PLB won't be switched on. Okay, that's probably the biggest downfall of the PLB in the aviation world. Also, the fact that you'll probably keep it in a grab bag or your flight bag, which may not be accessible to you easily whilst you're in an emergency in flight. So yeah, I'd bear that in mind when you're thinking about what's the best option for you. The PLBs themselves are designed to float as long as they have no damage to them. They do have the strobe light, as the EPIRB does as well, and they're designed to transmit for the same period as the ELT for that minimum of 24 hours. Okay, I see here a question from Lloyd. Do you respond equally to unregistered units as you would to registered beacons, or do you register us? There's no precedence for us when it comes to responding to EPIRBs, beacons, any situation at all. We respond to everyone directly. The problem for us with unregistered beacons is we cannot make that one phone call to an emergency contact to find out who has the beacon or what the intended operation of was that with that beacon. If you go out flying and you tell your wife or your partner or the flying school or whatever organisation you're with what you intend to do, and that information is noted down, and that person's contact details are on PLB registration details, we can call that person straight away and know exactly what is going on, who's involved, how many people are attending, all that sort of thing. It just gives us a really good background information before we start. See here, Cody has asked, how does JRC manage SAR efforts in an aircraft is reported as missing? The aircraft reported as missing, we will go through basic intel gathering. We'll try and find out whether the aircraft actually took off, whether the aircraft landed where it was supposed to, we'll look at weather in between the two areas. We'll look at the ability of the aircraft to, how long it can be in the air for. Is it still possible flying? We'll look at craft tracking, so whether the aircraft's got spider tracks, whether it's got Oz runways, anything like that that can give us the opportunity to find it airborne or track a landing. If that's no good, we will then look at airfields around the area. We'll start calling around, making sure it hasn't landed somewhere else. we'll build up whatever information we can, and we'll try and reduce the size of the area we have as our likely event, and then we'll sort of narrow it down. If we need to, we'll get aircraft up flying as quickly as we can. We'll fly the intended route, and we'll fly out normally to a 10 nautical mile corridor either side of the track. No GPS navigation nowadays. Majority of pilots can well and truly stay within that 10 nautical mile buffer zone. And then we'll build up our SAR intelligence picture from that. From Kevin, as I fly in both New Zealand and Australia, when borders allow, I have a New Zealand registered PLB. With this cause much delay? The same information that is registered to the PLB in New Zealand will be downloaded to us via the local user term. New Zealand will be made aware of it because it's a New Zealand registered PLB, even though it's active in Australia, but we will get the primary information, and our response will be as any other beacon. I'll do one more question here from John before we press on. I have both PLB and Garmin InReach. We use the Iridium satellite. In an emergency SOS situation, is there an advantage in using one over the other? They're both good systems. If you have the Garmin InReach system where we have two-way comms, so the International Emergency Response Coordination Center in America will manage your Garmin InReach device. They will contact us and let us know that you've activated your system. We will then prosecute your InReach device in exactly the same manner we would your PLB. If your PLB is registered and it has all your updated information on it, there's no benefit or detraction from the InReach device. But if it has two-way communications, which PLBs don't, you will be able to pass messages through the IERCC to us to let us know exactly what the problem is. It could be as simple as you ran out of fuel and you've had a outlanding, or it could be that you've had a heavy landing or a crash landing, multiple injuries, you need emergency help immediately. So having that two-way communication is certainly of a benefit if that's what you have in your system. Hope that answers the questions so far that have been put up. I'll just continue with what we're talking about now, and we'll come back to some more questions in a sec. Okay, so emergency activations. So if you are forced down, it's certainly activate the distress beacon immediately. And I would suggest that if you are still airborne and you suspect you are going to have a hard landing and might not have the opportunity to activate your beacon on landing, do it airborne. It's certainly not going to cause any problems for us. And if anything, it might give us the ability to track the aircraft position to the ground. But certainly, if you are in any sort of imminent danger or you feel like you need assistance to get out of there, you're not going to be able to control the situation yourself, turn that beacon on as soon as you land. Okay, where an ELT is permanently installed, unable to confirm that it is activated automatically, activate the ELT manually, switching it on in the cockpit or going to the unit itself. If you're not sure that the G switch is activated, turn it on yourself. You don't want to be sitting there for 4 or 5 hours wondering why no one's come for you to realise later on that the G switch hasn't worked. It's a mechanical device and things will go wrong occasionally. So, make sure you've given yourself the best opportunity and turn it on yourself. Where a portable distress beacon is being used, if possible, select an elevator clear and reasonably close to the aircraft. So if you can get to high ground with your PLB or a clear area, obviously we're going to have a better chance of picking up the signal from that position rather than if you're in an enclosed valley or inside a building or inside the aircraft. If you can see the sky, then the system should be able to see the satellites. But also, we also want to make sure that with that 1215 beacon, that it's radiating out in it's almost like an NDB type approach. So it's non-directional. It's just going to radiate in a circular pattern. We want to have that being able to be home from any direction. Place the beacon on the ground on an earth mat. If an earth mat is not available, place the stress beacon on the wing of the aircraft or other reflective surface. So an earth mat could be anything like a space blanket or anything like that. It's going to help reflect that signal back up to the ground and towards the satellite systems or towards the atmosphere. The aircraft wing is a great one if you're in that clear area already. The other good thing about putting it on the aircraft wing is the position that's being sent via the satellite is the exact location of the aircraft. To walk off 250 meters or something, then there is a slight disparity between where the aircraft is. Any rescue helicopter or any rescue aircraft is going to see the aircraft wreckage and assume that's where you are. Okay, secure the ELT with rocks, sticks, tape, etc. So we want to make sure that getting bumped around. We want to be vertical. That's how it operates in the best possible scenario, and it's going to have the strongest signal with the antenna vertical. Prevent anything touching the antenna, as this will also degrade from the aircraft, the ELT performance. So again, once you've set that antenna up, try not to go and touch the antenna. Just by touching it, you, as it said there, you'll grade the performance. Importantly, don't switch the beacon off unless instructed by your rescuers or by us here in the JRCC. You know, there's a lot of talk about only putting it on for 10 minutes on the top of the hour. Is that to prolong the life of the battery? The biggest chance you are going to have of being rescued is in that first 24-hour period, and your beacon is designed as a minimum to last 24 hours. So have the beacon on, radiating 100% of the time. You know, turn it on at the first opportunity and keep it on. Only turn it off when you've been instructed to do so. We don't want to have and then go to find that location to find that it stopped radiating. It's a question what we start to assume possibly the fixed means. And once doubt creeps in, then possibly our response could be negated to an effect. So keep that beacon on and wait with it on for rescue or advice. Avoid confusion, direction finding equipment on search aircraft. Avoid having two beacons on within 1 nautical mile of each other. If 2 or more beacons are available, should be used to rationalise the extend the alerting period. Sorry, that was poorly read on my behalf. Yeah, so we don't want to have 2 beacons on because the 2 signals will confuse the signal we're trying to home to. And by having only one on, we've just doubled the extended the life of the beacons in location. If we have 4 in location, you know, we could have greater than 4 24-hour periods. But yeah, the 1 nautical mile rule is a rule of thumb. If you feel like you're too close to somebody else who's got their beacon on, turn one off, wait for that signal to die down and get the other beacon going as soon as that's died. In the event of search, an aircraft may drop a radio to you. Before using the radio, walk away from the beacon and avoid interference. And again, that's just general radio comms. Don't turn your beacon off. The radio will be sent down to you. It's an AMSA-based radio. It'll only have possibly 2 radio frequencies you'll be able to use. Turn it on, talk into it, wait for the response, but move away from the beacon so there's no interference with the 1215 signal. The 406 hertz frequency signal is not going to interfere with the radio comms, but the 1215 possibly could. Okay, you see here, this is a photo of an aircraft wreckage. It's obviously a larger aircraft than anything that you'd have in RAA Oz, but the system here, this would show you that, you know, aircraft crashes can be very sort of messy and untidy. As you're aware, you may not have the ability to turn that ELT on airborne, so on the ground, so make sure you turn it on airborne. And a beacon in that wreckage will still be transmitting and we will still be detecting something. So, you know, even in the worst case scenario, your ELT is still going to be transmitting and people are going to be making their way to your location. So yeah, keep that beacon on, all I can keep saying. Okay, Things you can do to help us. Buy a GPS beacon. Obviously, that's the first thing. Get the GPS beacon. The difference in price between the GPS beacon and the non-GPS beacon is negligible now as the technology becomes more and more standard. But the ability for us to do a rescue effectively is so greatly enhanced by the GPS beacon. Register your beacon. Go onto the AMSA webpage, go to the beacon page within the AMSA website and register your beacon and keep your details up to date. If you're going to be doing a large trip, if you're going to be doing a flight somewhere, you can put an itinerary into the beacon details and make sure that every leg of what you're doing is known about. Obviously, on completion, we'd ask you to go back and to clear that itinerary. So if there's something happening in your local area with the beacon being active, we're not confusing the situation with what you did 3 months previous. Keep your details up to date. I mentioned that. Check the battery expiry. Battery expiries, normally, I think it's off the top of my head, it's around about 9 years for the battery. So it is long enough for you to easily sort of have it fall from your thought process. So when you're getting your aircraft service or at intervals, whether it's annually, whatever, check your battery expiry and make sure as you're coming to your expiry date that you've got another beacon that you can replace and dispose of your beacon appropriately. I'll talk about disposing of it shortly. Test your beacon. So there is a test function on the beacon. Make sure you go to the actual database, so the web page for your PLB, the OEM manufacturer's database, and they will have in there how to test your beacon correctly. We have a lot of false detections here at the JRCC, and much of those are due to people testing their beacon where they actively test it in the on position, not the test position. Not a huge concern for us. It does add to our workload, but if you don't need to do it live, then don't do it. It also saves some of the battery life. Know how to use your beacon. Important that you are familiar with your beacon. Know how to use it. Use the manufacturer's webpage to learn about it. Don't just rely on what the guy at BCF or wherever you buy your beacon tells you. Try and become as familiar with it as possible. This is something that is going to save your life in the worst case scenario. Okay, and prepare to survive. So as well as the beacon, have our survival plans in place if you are going to be able to do an outlet. Some of you guys operate in some fairly remote areas, some fairly built-up tiger country type areas. Very difficult for us to get assets in to recover you. So have that preparation to survive. Have a plan have a 24-hour survival plan or a 36-hour survival plan in place, and make sure those people that are with you have an understanding of that too. Okay, as I mentioned, incorrect disposal and inadvertent activation are a big problem for us. We fly aircraft on so many PLBs that are located in local dumps and waste facilities. The millions of dollars we spend on that I'd hate to count. And it simply comes down to incorrect disposal. Unfortunately, if you look at the AMSA webpage, it says you can just dispose of it in the local rubbish. And that's true. There's nothing wrong with that. What we'd like you to do is preferably take it into a BCF or Anaconda or some sort of area where you're going to buy your next one. Have them disconnect the battery. Okay? With the battery disconnected, it can't inadvertently go off. And then they will correctly dispose of it. If you are going to put it in your local rubbish, and as I said, there's no problem with that. Look into the manufacturer's webpage on how to disconnect the battery wires first before you dispose of it. It will save so many false activations around the country, giving us the opportunity to respond to the real ones more effectively. Okay, that is pretty much the beacons presentation for you guys. I hope it wasn't too onerous for you. I hope you got a lot of information out of it. We can open up some more questions if anybody has any. Just wait for you guys to type anything in if you do. So Nicholas, I also fly GA. I am planning a flight in a light twin to Solomon Islands via PNG. How good is the liaison between Australia, PNG, Solomons? Excellent. Guys, I wouldn't say daily, but we have very good open lines of communication between PNG and Solomons. I would have to say their availability to respond is not as good as an Australian, as within the Australian SSR. That being said, if you're going over to those areas with a Australian registered PLB or an ELT, we will get notification of any distress. So we will make sure that PNG or Solomons or whichever area you're in are responding appropriately. And if need be, we have often sent our challengers up to those areas to aid and assist in searches. So good lines of communication, and you're still not out of reach for AMSA to be able to assist you in that situation. Question from Jill. Members often express concerns over possible charges if they have a search and rescue process. Are there any charges for SAR operations? There are no charges for SAR operations. There are no charges for falsely setting off a beacon. We will prosecute every incident appropriately, and there is no response from us to recover costs at this stage. And I don't believe that will ever be the case. So that's why I say I understand some people are sort of a little bit concerned. They have an outlanding somewhere. They're umming and ahhing about whether they should turn your beacon on. Just turn it on, okay? If one of the statements I was trained with when I was doing search and rescue in the military was, if there's any doubt, there's no doubt. If you have any concerns and you're wondering, you're umming and ahhing, just turn it on, okay? There is no cost recovery, and there's no one's going to turn up to you and have a go at you for turning it on. Okay, what about flights between Oz and New Zealand? In a sense of GA light aircraft, or are we talking larger RPT type stuff? Our search boundary goes up to a position where New Zealand takes over. We have the same sort of response with New Zealand Rescue Coordination Centre as we do with PNG. We're in constant contact with them. Anything that goes on, whether it's in the New Zealand search and rescue area or within Australia, we will get notification, and so will New Zealand. The way the beacons are set up, if it's the country of registration, will get a notification of one of their beacons being activated. The location or the search and rescue region where the beacon is detected will also notify their coordination centre. So it goes off to two areas if it's what we call an out-of-area activation. It sounds like for your question, I recently stuffed up my SAR time on a flight to William Creek and was getting a series of no call. We will send out text messages via a Telstra app. We'll send the text messages out to the aircraft with the Y code of where they were going to land. We will have a search and rescue phase, what we call a phase, is activated. So whether that becomes a alert phase, an uncertainty phase or alert phase or a distress phase will depend on the type of situation it is. So when we say there has been a phase activated, it could be as simple as what we call a insurfer or uncertainty phase. As JRCC had not received a response from me, I was able to call back and cancel the search. And that's exactly what we want. As soon as you get a text message, we will try and call your mobile. We'll send your mobile a text message. We will call your flight school. We will call your emergency contacts. We'll call anyone and everyone. We'll call your local member of parliament if we think it's going to help, to try and find out where you guys are and get you home safe or confirm that you are safe. Yeah, but again, I stipulate the biggest concern I can see for you guys is the fact that there will be a charge. There is no monetary charge whatsoever for any search phase in Australia. I'm not sure about the Garmin InReach devices. I believe you will have a monthly membership phase. I don't know what happens after that if you activate your beacon. Any further questions? Okay, Christopher, if flying in the bush with no mobile signal and the beacon is activated prior to landing, how do we notify you that there is no emergency if landing is safe? You can't. Okay, so in that instance, once the beacon's safe, you're in a safe situation, you have everything under control, turn your beacon off. We'll note that the beacon's off. What we also do, one of the responses is we will contact air traffic control and we'll get any overflying aircraft to listen out on 1215. And some other aircraft have 406 detection to listen out for us. If they start to get a lot of aircraft in that area saying they're not hearing anything, we may cancel the phase on that information alone. What instance in that one, Christopher, if that was the case, if you've set it off because you're concerned about an unsafe landing or a dangerous situation, you land safely and everything's fine, possibly ring up, because hopefully you've registered your beacon. We would have contacted your next of kin or your emergency contacts at that point. Ring up, let them know that you've turned your beacon on, and then possibly call the Joint Rescue Coordination Centre and let us know that you turned your beacon on. This is the location, but everything's fine. Okay, if you had to summarise, what are the key messages you would like RAI's members to understand? Okay, the basis thing, buy a PLB, have an EPIRB or a ELT and used in an emergency. Make sure you know how to use it and make sure it's registered with your current information. I can't stipulate that enough. Make sure it's registered with your current information. Okay. Can you add specific trip information to your people? Yes, you can. As I mentioned before, go to the AMSA webpage. You can itinerary on for your. You can back, and if you plan the next one, you can put a new one in. It's updatable at any time. If you have this in multiple aircraft, if you have one PLB and you fly two aircraft, you can put information for both aircraft in that database. The more information you put in there, current, the better chance we have of finding you in any situation, okay, which is our aim. Any further questions, guys? I hope that was informative and certainly not painful in any way.
I think that's really valuable information. Thanks so much for joining us, Jim.
Thanks for having me.
Key points there that I took away is obviously to check those expiry dates. We do often find when we're out auditing, we find that PLBs have been expired, and just that note to always switch it on if you think you're going to be in an emergency. If you've encountered an engine failure, you're much better off to turn that on and not need it than to have something happen during your landing and not be able to activate that on the ground. So it's really great to have that comfort from your perspective that there's no cost and no other implications if that is activated and then not required. And obviously to plan to survive, but also importantly to tell somebody where you're going before going flying, and make sure that your emergency contact details are up to date as well. I'm sure for you guys, having someone you can contact straight away that knows where you were going or where someone was traveling certainly makes that search and rescue effort a lot easier, rather than not knowing any information other than where somebody took off from.
Yeah, and that's right. I just see here there's a little comment here from Jennifer. 2 phone numbers for you. Aviation Rescue Coordination Centre. The 1-800-815-257 is our primary aviation number. So if you ring the other one, that'll come through to us without the 814-931 number is fine. But the 815-257 is the primary number. If you all have that phone number in your mobile phones, stickers on your placards, anything like that, in your flight information folders, that's the number to call, and it comes straight to us.
Thank you so much for that information. Our flight schools should also be aware of those contact details in the event that they do need to contact JRC. One final thing that I'll just note quickly is that it is my understanding that the likes of the Garmin InReach cannot be used to fulfill your PLB carriage requirements. So you must have a PLB on board if you're traveling within beyond 50 nautical miles from your takeoff point. There are certainly some advantages to those Garmin products, that InReach device as mentioned. However, you can't purely carry one of those and fulfill those requirements is my understanding. So if you do want more information on those Garmin products, though, of course, tune in tomorrow with our presentation with Garmin, and the representative will be able to answer them there as well. But once again, thank you very much, Jim, for joining us. That's been really valuable, and we really appreciate the support.
Excellent. Thank you, guys, and safe flying. Try not to call us.
Much. That's the one. We hope we don't have to, but it's nice knowing we've got the support there in the background if it's needed. Okay. So thank you. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you.
Alrighty, so that was a really valuable session there, and some fantastic information from the JRCC. Please do take that on board and make sure you've got those devices on hand, that they're working, that they're within their registration and their battery life as well. All really important stuff to know in terms of search and rescue efforts. And as Jim mentioned, never be afraid to set one off. You're much better off to have a beacon activated and not require it. There's no repercussions if you do set that off. So just to finalize the presentation now, we'd once again like to thank Garmin for sponsoring today's presentations. Quite timely with the products that they provide there. So tune in tomorrow to ask some more questions about the Garmin range as well. We couldn't do National Safety Month and offer more than $10,000 worth of giveaways if it weren't for our sponsors. So we'd really like to thank our sponsors for the continued support of RAL Safety Month. Don't go away. We've got a couple more presentations left this afternoon. We've got Jill Bailey returning to speak about safety at CTAFs and alerted see and avoid with the near-miss accidents that we often see reported to RALs. And later on, we've got Tim Howes and Dan Compton joining us to talk about bush and strip flying. So plenty more on this afternoon, and a full range of presentations throughout tomorrow as well for our maintainers and aircraft owners and equipment-based presentations. So plenty more. Thank you for tuning in. We really appreciate the support, and we hope to see you at our next presentation. Have a good afternoon.